Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the programme where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. With me today are Cam Davedi, welcome Cam, investor and founder of Premier Property. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And on your left is Dev Singh, founder and CEO of Rent ID. Welcome. Hope you both had a good trip in.
Yep.
All safe and sound, jolly good. Okay, well we'll get straight on with the questions and Cam, you're going first. Do the panel think that the continuing delays with Crossrail will have an adverse effect on property values, both residential and commercial, in the short term? And do they think that the served areas will have a dramatic uplift as and when the service commences, if and when it does, of course, I suppose? Subject to, TfL's funding? I don't know, but there we are. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great question there, Stephen. So the way we look at this as momentum investors is that there's three actual phases of this. So the first part is where there is no confirmation. No one really knows that there's anything coming into an area. At that point, really, if I'm being completely honest, is people are really sort of taking a hedge on that. It's a bit of a gamble, really. And the one thing that we don't do as momentum investors is gamble. We want to make sure it's de-risked. So my point is that first phase, we normally skip that first phase and move on to the second phase. And for your viewers, if you're investing, the second phase, from my point of view, is the phase where you have confirmation that there's actually some structure coming into the area. There's going to be some regeneration coming in. And one of the things that you really want to be careful about is, really understanding that that isn't just talk. It's not just being said in the paperwork, because as we know, councils can take many years for anything to actually really happen. And even then, they can always change their mind and they can always restructure what they're going to be actually doing. So my point is, always look for financial commitment of a council, of a borough, of an area, so there's actually money being pumped in and there's confirmation of money actually being allocated to that area. Now, once you've got that, and there's regeneration happening in the area, such as things that you mentioned, that's a great point for investors like all of us to actually be jumping into a solid investment, because what you're going to find is, in real terms, you're really buying discounted properties because there is going to be an uplift because of all the things that happen in the area. So that's really the ultimate point from my point of view when you can jump in. The third phase is when the infrastructure is actually in place. So we can think about specific examples like, in Stratford, London, the Olympic Park scenario. So when we knew that was going to happen, there was an uplift, but it was a good time for investors to get in. But once it was actually delivered, the prices rose again, probably too late for momentum investors. So we really got to be outlining these areas where that can actually happen, where we got the confirmation. Now, just final point on this is Rishi Sunak. In his last budget, has announced over £4 billion of investing, hasn't he, in the northeast, into north of Watford. So these are areas that from my point of view, people can be looking at as momentum investors and see and find exactly what I've just shared with you, where you can actually find those areas where that money is going into, so you can do the same thing.
Okay. Have you found that the prices, you mentioned Stratford, for instance, and the post-Olympic developments there, have the prices maintained at the higher levels that they rose to? Well,
Stratford is an area where, from my point of view, is not something we would jump into, because we feel it's overpriced in terms of an investment area. We've got to keep in mind what we do is it's a business. It's not just buying residential property and so on. So we treat it like a business, meaning as a momentum investors, we're looking for whatever discounts we can find, whether that's specific discounts in the stock or specific discounts in areas. So once all of the infrastructure, everything is there, really the areas maximise really. So it's a bit too late for discounts in that. Unless things change and the recession means that there's more stock becoming available at a lower value, that's when we would jump in.
Sure. Dev, anything to add to that?
So specifically in regards to the Crossrail, I think we found there was a huge jump in prices. Let's take the route between Reading and London across Slough, Hayes. We saw 25% increases in property prices, developers popping up all over the place, developments going up. So I think there is definitely a price point that they will reach. I don't know whether it's the right thing to do necessarily if you're an investor to purchase at the higher level, because developers are obviously maximising, and the prices that they're setting are for the future as well. They're not setting £400,000 for a flat isn't necessarily what it's worth today. It's what they're saying, right, when this comes into place, once the Crossrail is in effect. So you've got to be very careful as to when you're going to purchase. So
I suppose timing is everything, isn't it?
Timing is everything, and we all know the closer you are to a location like the Crossrail, the more expensive it's going to be, because it's a supply and demand. There's always going to be a demand to be there, but it's what you're buying for. If you're buying it for a buy-to-let, if you're buying it to live in, two very different situations. So there's already been a surge. We're all aware of that. It's all over the place. There are definitely increased prices. You've got to be very careful about them leveling out or possibly going lower. And I think that's a concern of many people when things are actually in situ, Crossrail is running, and all the services are in place. But there will always be a demand for those areas.
Yes, I think I have a concern. I think with Crossrail in particular, whether it's going to end up a bit like HS2. You've got to take into account the cost of these services and whether everyday commuters are going to be able to actually afford the journey.
They're levying that off the other way, aren't they? They're saying, right, you would have had to, say for example, Canary Wharf, you would have had to live near to Canary Wharf in order to even obtain a position, which is obviously a position of a certain value. So they're saying, right, now you're commutable outside of London or further down, and the price of living should be lower. In fact, it's gone up quite substantially. So it's going to level off at a certain point. So yeah, I would be concerned, but it's all about forecasting. You can never quite be in. I mean, Reading is an example I'm very aware of. Reading is a bubble outside of London, and it just continues to thrive and go up and up. When the Crossrail comes in, the people coming from Canary Wharf, let's say, to Reading, they're going to.
But as with Canary Wharf, you've got some very serious companies investing in Reading, haven't you?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of companies relocating there. There's a lot of companies but they're relocating all over the country, aren't they?
But I mean, that's the test of sustainability, isn't
Absolutely.
it? I think that's your point. Yeah. Okay, great. Dev, your question. I know that many investors buy off-plan with an eye to buy to let. Naturally, they hope to be buying at an advantageous rate. Do the experts think that buying so far in advance works for somebody who wants the property for their own future home? If so, what are the risks one should consider? Okay,
so absolutely, most of the clients, most of the people I'm aware of have made relevant and lucrative purchases off plan. Again, I wouldn't walk into something where you've got an off plan development, which is a completely, it's an off plan of a small amount or a small block somewhere else, which just has no relevant effect. When a developer chooses a plot, whatever size they are, they're choosing it because there is a demand for that area. They wouldn't be making the return otherwise. So, yeah, I think that going into this with a view to live in there, you would have an opportunity to invest in something that would create a buy-to-let sort of a return for you for the next couple of years, 4 or 5 years. Value will go up, prices will go up. How much they go up, again, you've got to be very aware of what's going on. If there's multiple blocks going up, if there's multiple developers phasing in over time, your development is going to become one of those, which is then going to be not as lucrative and not as desirable, so therefore may not fetch the same pricing. So, but because this particular person, let's say, wants to move in for themselves, that takes us almost a second seat to how lucrative it is long term. Because once they've made that initial push, earned the money that they need to earn off a rental income, then they're moving in themselves. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think you can make it very lucrative for yourselves and increase that property in quite large amounts. Okay. Cam, what do you think?
It becomes a principle of buying the best quality at the lowest price. So what we do is exactly this, and it becomes, like I say, a principle. That could apply to everything, property and other things as well. So we're buying a beer, we look for a litre rather than 330 mils because you're going to get more for your money. Apply it to property, it's exactly the same thing. So my personal view on off-plan is that it's just like the fact that you're paying a premium for the off-plan, whereas there's secondary stock, nice Victorian, Georgian types of properties where you're able to purchase a property where you've got much more, let's say in real terms, discount if you like. So you're getting more for your money. So off-plan is a little bit, if I use the analogy of a brand new car. a brand new car, as soon as it goes off the forecourt, it devalues in price. And there's a lot of analysis behind this that we've done as well. And what we tend to find is from our personal analysis is that it can take typically 4 years for an off-plan, a new build type of property to actually come back to the actual price of a secondary stock property, I'm calling it. So there's basically a 4-year gap for it to really pick up the price. So what I'm saying is secondary stock tends to be more discounted. Off-plan, you're paying a premium. So you've got to make a decision there, which one seems to be the right one for you. And on the flip side of this, if you're thinking of it as a business, why not be that person who's actually creating the off-plan, really maximizing on it? Because it's really the developer who maximizes on the off-plan rather than, unfortunately, the person who's actually buying that off-plan. Because the developers thought about how can they add value to that site, how can they really maximize it. That's already been done. Whereas with secondary stock, if someone's buying secondary stock, you've got the opportunities within permitted development rights to extend into lofts and extensions and do so much more with an asset while you're purchasing it. So that's my view.
Okay. I think there's a couple of things with off-plan. I mean, I've been doing these things for about 40 years now, and if anybody wants to show me another show flat or another skyscraper, I'll scream, I think. But I just look at it this way. I think there are probably 2 times to buy off-plan. Is one at the very, very beginning where the developer is nervous and wants to make those initial couple of sales. And I think in that respect, I think sometimes you can get a bit of a deal. And then again, when he's selling the last 2 or 3 of the 500 in the block, and he just wants to know that he's out and he can tell his bank that it's all done and dusted, you occasionally can get a bit of a deal then. But I think you're right. For the majority of it, you're going to be paying a premium, and it's going to take some time to come back. And I also think that for young people aspiring to own property, I tell you what, you've got to be pretty clever to be able to judge what your finances are going to be in 3 years' time or 2 years' time, haven't you? Because remember, it's very easy to put your 10% down, not so easier to get out of the contract.
Absolutely.
If you can't get the money to buy it.
Well, there's also risks from the developers themselves, because you've got to choose the right developers.
Of course.
And if those developers aren't around, we were talking about de-risking that 10%, or you've exchanged a property or a plot, if the developer's not there in 3 years' time,
exactly,
it's a problem. So there is plenty, but again, in my experience, if you do your research, it's always down. I always advocate this. You have to research everything. You can't walk into a property purchase of any level without checking the area and doing everything that it said. And as Cam said, yes, you can have better deals in secondary stock property. Yes, there's better return on investment for that. But with off-plan, there is still money to be made.
Okay. All right. Thank you, gents. That's all we've got time for in this first half of the show. Join me again after the break. Hello, welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and joining me are Cam Davedi and Dev Singh. Welcome back, gents.
Thanks for having me.
Right, Dev, your second question. Could the panel give me some guidance on whether I should approach lenders directly, i.e. banks and building societies, or use the service of a mortgage broker to secure funding for the purchase of my first property? And I'm presuming he means buy to let here.
Sure.
Sounds like an investment, doesn't it?
Sure, yeah. So, okay, banks and building societies absolutely are worth approaching. However, they will only offer their own select products and what's available at that time.
Right.
I would always go to an independent mortgage advisor. I would always approach someone, because they have and probably multiple, just to get a scope of what products are out there and that they fit your requirements. It's not going to be a one-shoe-fits-all size sort of situation for anybody, and I feel that if you close yourself off and don't do your research as always, and don't shop around and use mortgage brokers to do that, there's some great independent mortgage brokers out there that will, take your situation, even if it is quite complex, and be able to sort of put a product in place that would allow you to purchase your property. And again, a good broker should be looking at what you're looking to do now, what you're looking to exit at, what your return is, and possibly if you're looking to build a portfolio. And I think they'll be able to do a far better job in some ways than necessarily just going to one place with 2 to 3
So help you
products.
structure the whole business,
Yeah.
in other words,
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
won't they? I know on Question Time we get asked so many times about who people should use and who they shouldn't use, and I think the constant message is that you build a team,
Absolutely.
you know, and I think a broker is probably part of that team, is he not?
Not saying banks don't have their place. Of course they have their place, but again, they're limited to what they can offer because it's their product.
And as you say, building society the same. It's
Exactly the same.
Single product
Yeah.
organisation. What do you think, Cam?
So yeah, so adding on to what Dave's just said there, really looking for mortgage brokers is a great way of doing this. And what I would suggest is, assess whole of the market mortgage brokers. So key question that you want to be asking the mortgage broker is, are you whole of market? Which just to clarify means that they are willing, they're able to look at all the products in the market in terms of what they do. So that's a good question to ask.
Not just ones they're getting a commission from.
Not just one. Now, to be fair, they're all gonna. Everyone's got a service, yeah, quite right. But they should, and they're professional people, aren't they? They'll look at the whole of the market and they'll find the right product for you. So that's one key question. And another one is, just to be aware of what the mortgage broker actually does, because there's mortgage brokers who deal with buy-to-lets and the residential side of things. There's mortgage brokers that deal with HMOs and premier development. There's mortgage brokers that deal with commercial and so on. So another question to ask, really, to find out the mortgage broker is right for what you want, is to find out what is your main business. Because typically when you ask that question to a mortgage broker, can you get me finance? And the answer is usually, yeah, we do all of it. So another way you can really assess it and go a little bit deeper is by asking, what is your main business? If you're, for example, looking to do buy-to-let, is your main business more than 20% buy-to-let, would you say, or less than 20% buy-to-let? So from that, you get a direct answer. The business is more or less. That way you know that you're approaching the right mortgage broker. So of course, if they say over 20% is, then you know you're in the right field. Same thing with commercial, same thing with whatever your niche is that you're actually investing in.
Sure.
So, yeah.
And again, with a broker, as you say, you've got the freedom of choice of lenders, and who may be your ideal lender for property 1 might not be your right lender for property 10 later on in the game.
It tends to work out that way anyway. You don't tend to raise financing necessarily with the same person, or even in the same property. You may be looking to bridge in order to buy, in order to do something else. So you'll use multiple brokers and financing opportunities. So,
Yeah. I mean, Cam, as you say, a good test question is to ask what percentage of the relevant business they do. But just knowing the way people search these days, they go onto Google or whatever and they'll punch in mortgage brokers. Are there any telltale signs of what you should or shouldn't be looking for there? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so one great thing is to really create a personal relationship. So the way we do this is a personal relationship with mortgage brokers. One of the things that you can look for is, have they been in the business for at least 5 years plus? The mortgage brokers that we deal with, they'll be in the business for 10, 20 plus years. They play people like us, right? So they're in the business. So you look for that, look for experience. That's one thing. Also, I personally like independent mortgage brokers, sort of mortgage brokers that are within a small team. You seem to get that sort of personal connection with them. They seem to have more time for you rather than just being a number in a cog, if you like, through large mortgage organizations.
A large group who've got an office in each town, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So
okay,
that sort of so looking for that sort of independent, like the old school type of people, like as it used to be, right? If you go to a bookshop, just to use an analogy, you go to a bookshop where someone actually knows about the books, they actually understand, that sort of, if you can get that old school vibe, if you call it, like I like to call it, that really helps. And we discussed banks. There's a little bit of a caveat with banks that we find, and that is that on the odd occasion, there are certain lenders who will bring up a niche product, which isn't available to mortgage brokers, and it's just that specific bank that has it. So it's good to look out for these as well, on time to time as well.
You tend to find that, don't you, where we have a period where perhaps, like we've had in the past, where there's been a restriction on the level of deposit, it's been relatively high, then you'll often find one of the continental banks come in and suddenly start doing 95% mortgages instead of, sort of 75.
yeah, they've got slightly more aggressive. Absolutely.
Yeah, but it does tend to ripple through. But again, a good broker should be able to guide you with that too, shouldn't they? Okay, good. Okay, thank you for that, gents. So Cam, your second question is, I'm in the process of buying an apartment in a 40-storey building which has just been recently completed. The service charge quoted by the developer seems extremely low, and while this estimate is welcome news, I am concerned about how rapidly it will rise once the developer has gone away. Is there any way of capping or controlling rises in this service charge?
That is a key concern, to be fair.
I think the answer is no, isn't it?
Well, it is a key concern, and I suppose, I mean, if the viewers actually asking that question has already done what they've done, then obviously there's learnings from that. One thing they can actually do is create a committee between the leaseholders in that building, so that they have some power in terms of assessing what the service charge is and having a bit of a pushback if required with that. So that's one thing they can do. But moving forward from that learnings, it's really about finding properties where you can actually become the freeholder or part freeholder. Leases are changing massively in the coming months anyway, aren't they? So there's a lot happening in that lease environment.
But it's not going to be retrospective, is it?
It's not going to be retrospective, absolutely. And we've got all the cladding issues coming up, and there's a lot of issues, to be fair. So if you're asking me honestly, I'm not an advocate of that. But if someone's already done it, obviously it's done. It's a done thing. So really, it's about coming back to that committee. Going forward, you can look at properties where, like I say, you can become a part freeholder. That will really help. And also, if you're in buildings where you've got it's a small block where you can actually have less leaseholders in there. So, for example, let's say a Victorian property where, let's say, that's been converted into 2 or 3 flats, for example. Things like that, in those types of that type of stock, those types of places, you can actually negotiate with the other leaseholders. And if it's, let's say, 2 in that block, it could be a 50-50, which means that you can make decisions together. It's becomes so much easier. So just different viewpoints.
So are you advocating steering away from the 40-storey blocks then?
If I'm being honest, as a mentor investor, that's not something that I would do or suggest to someone I cared about.
Okay. What do you think?
I think Cam's got his own experiences, and obviously his business runs a certain way, but there's a lot of blocks there, and they exist. And there are service charges, and
I can tell you I live in one.
Exactly.
The service charge is astronomical.
I think there is no way of protecting yourself. There are associations out there that can help intervene. There is even law to say that every seller, agent or vendor should be providing all the information very transparently. It was an act brought in 2014.
It's the last 3 years, isn't it?
It's now there. It's obviously sitting there, and they need to be giving you transparent information. Now, unfortunately, we all know, and there is articles out there, there's news out there, where there is almost the leaseholder is trapped within its own, because of the cost alone. So, yeah, there is growing concern. I would say there are more associations, there is more groups coming together to deal with this, because there are ever increasing costs. But there also the buildings, it's very difficult to justify because you don't know what's going to happen post developer leaving.
No, I think one of the things here as well, my experience in new developments down here in particular, there are 2 things to watch for. Is when a developer builds a new building, there's a little bit of a catch for him, because the moment he charges the first flat with the first level of service charge, he's responsible for all the empty flats too and has to pay at the full rate. So what developers tend to do is to say, right, I'm not going to charge the service charge for maybe 12 months. I'm going to give you a holiday. And you think, oh, wow, what a nice chap and all the rest of it. But actually what he's doing, he's just putting in skeleton services just to keep the block going. He can then quote a low service charge budget. And of course, he's not liable until the building's full and he charges everybody. But of course, that's probably in year 2 and the service charge will go through the roof. So we have seen that kind of scenario. So that's something I think to watch for. But again, I appreciate your comments, Cam, about the smaller blocks. I think it's a great advantage and a great plus for these smaller blocks. Because where you get 500 or 600 people living in a skyscraper and they're they're scattered all over the world, to get any kind of consensus with those owners to either buy the freehold or manage the property yourself, if in fact it's wise to do in this litigious age. I don't know how clever that is. It's a very difficult thing to organise, so I really take your point about the smaller properties. I think that's an awful lot safer. Well, there we are, gents, that's all we've got time for today. So big thank you to Cam Davedi, investor and founder of Premier Property, thank you, and to Dev Singh as well, founder and CEO of Rent ID. Thank you for joining us.